Joining me now is Ruth Ben-Ghiat, professor of history and a scholar of authoritarianism at New York University, and David Jolly, MSNBC political analyst and former Republican congressman who is no longer affiliated with the party. Ruth, I do want to go to you first and just get your reaction to these serial elections in Argentina, where Mr. Milei was elected, and the election of Mr. Wilders, who is a rather notorious Islamophobic and far right-wing figure.
Yeah, we're living through times where hate is on the agenda, anti-immigrant, anti-immigration hatred is currency. And it's like each one learns from the other. And we need to see the United States in perspective of this kind of transnational trend toward these outrageous rogue figures like Wilders, who, as you noted, is extremely violent against Islam and immigrants, and would like a total removal of immigrants. And we need to see this as related to what Trump wants to do. There's a reason he's always put immigration, from the very beginning, saying Mexicans were rapists. He's been kind of psychologically conditioning Americans to hate immigrants for many, many years. And now, if he comes back, he's going to implement policies that will resemble those of far-right leaders abroad.
And David, I'm reminded that Donald Trump, in his earliest iteration as a political, sort of pundit from the sidelines before he actually started running when he was pretending to run for president and didn't, his first sort of sign that he was, breaking bad was his accusations against Barack Obama, him joining on to that conspiracy theory that Barack Obama was a secret Kenyan Muslim, that he was lying about his faith and, was secretly a Muslim. That whole theory that Donald Trump jumped on and became kind of the leader of. And so it was very specifically rooted in Islamophobia. His lies about 9/11, claiming he saw Muslims cheering after 9/11 and, trying to stop a mosque from being built, on and on and on. Islamophobia kind of was his first entry into the door. And he is once again on the rise at a time when Europe is facing a potential influx again of, refugees from places like Syria, from places like Yemen, where there's a huge civil war, and now potentially Palestinian refugees. The timing, it's similar to the Brexit timing, and does it frighten you as much as it does me?
It does. It does. And I think there are two adjacent issues here, equally important. The first is Donald Trump, as a former president, possibly president again, his views on race and ethnicity. And you can throw in his management of housing projects and discrimination lawsuits in New York, to the Central Park Five, to his most recent statement saying that migrants poison the blood of America. Given that statement, that is an absolutely racist statement. I think there are reasons to qualitatively question Donald Trump's commitment to racial equality, or to form an opinion that perhaps he is somebody who holds racist ideas and ideals. That is an important qualitative issue, his view of race. But it is adjacent to and also part of the issue of protecting democracy, because part and parcel to equality is actually the protection of democracy. And I think that is the most important issue of our time, and one that voters will opine on next November, the protection of democracy here in the United States, because democracy is what secures one's suffrage and franchise. It provides for the rights of a political minority. It provides for an independent judiciary to enforce and interpret an independent constitution, arm's length from the chief executive. And that is the question of this time. Are we going to preserve democracy that then provides for equality and equity of all people so that we can self-govern? Or are we going to allow somebody to come in as a dictator, if you will, with dictatorial trends and perverse views of race and ethnicity? That's the danger. And the final point I'd make is, yes, it's about Donald Trump, but a leader without followers is just out for a walk. Donald Trump has a movement behind him and elected officials behind them, and each one of those candidates needs to be put to the same litmus test.
Yeah, and by the way, Ruth, to come back to you on this point, I think David makes excellent points. The United States has never been a multiracial democracy, right? We were a democracy for white Christian males, and everyone else was under, it was perfectly legal to kill black people until like the 1960s, right? In the United States, there was no legal system that would stop you. And to me, trying to form a multiracial democracy is even harder. There isn't a country that's been super successful at it on earth. I mean, we look what's happening in Israel, where there are two legal systems, whether you're Palestinian Arab or whether you're Jewish and Israeli. It's like there aren't countries that have done it well. Like England hasn't done it well. No one's done it well. But to me, Brexit was a symbol and was a signal as to something that could happen here. I want to play. I was on with Michael Moore, actually, and on Bill Maher's show. This was in 2016. And I want to let you listen to what he said about how we should have seen what was coming because Brexit happened. Take a look.
And I have to say, I mean, I'm sorry to have to kind of be the buzzkill here so early on, but I think Trump is going to win. I'm sorry. I live in Michigan. Let me tell you what it's going to be the Brexit strategy. The middle of England is Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And Mitt Romney lost by 64 electoral votes. The total electoral votes of those four states in the Rust Belt, 64.
I mean, I doubted it that night. He was right, Ruth. And the signs that we're seeing again, you're already seeing threats from Donald Trump's people, sweeping raids, giant camps, mass deportations. He's already saying that's what's going to happen, the kind of rhetoric. And the far right, the consolidation of that kind of thing and normalization of it, it does feel like a warning sign. And to me, Wilders isn't another Trump. Trump is another Wilders in a way, right?
Oh, yeah. And that's why he's in my book, Trump. And it was a struggle to have him in my book. And it's been a struggle to get Americans to see him as an authoritarian. It's in part because we're very wedded to this idea that we are, a democracy where these things can't happen. And we've seen, we had a coup attempt and people are not quite able to digest that we had a coup attempt that came far closer to succeeding than many realize. And, Trump has been conditioning people to find violence attractive, to say it's justified sometimes, it's patriotic. He's conditioned people, along with all of his enablers, Fox News and the GOP, to have little faith in elections, and now to dehumanize immigrants. The whole checklist, the whole playbook he's done now for 6-7 years very effectively. So there's zero reason, in my mind, having done research that shows every people who faced authoritarians thought that they were in denial. They thought that it wasn't going to happen to them. And we are no different. And we already had a coup attempt. That's the biggest, which one of our two major parties not only does not reject, but has integrated the methods and philosophy of this coup into their party dogma. So the danger is high.
And into their party dogma that includes, David Jolly, the same things that the Argentine that Milei wants: a national abortion ban, these extreme economic policies that make the billionaires even richer and relegate workers to essentially servant status. They all have the same policies. Hungary, formerly Poland, they got out of it. Italy, they're all saying the same things. Why is it that Americans can't hear it when Trump says it? And Mike Johnson, by the way, will do all of it, by the way. Mike Johnson is extremist and will do it all.
That's right. That's exactly right. That is the coalition, the Trump coalition. I think in many ways it's because Republicans get away with messaging around ignorance and taking advantage of voters. And what I mean by that is, take Donald Trump's Muslim ban. That was the moment when I went to the House floor as a member of Congress, called on Donald Trump to drop out of the race. December of 2015, the Muslim ban. And my point was this: we do have a security issue in the United States. Who gets in and who is allowed status to come in? Of course we do. It doesn't matter where they come from. So we have a security issue. We do not have a religious issue. But they communicate around a Muslim ban that is xenophobic, arguably racist, and they leave out that actually, yeah, we do have a legitimate security question. Why don't we focus on the security question? And so we counter that movement, that racist movement, by highlighting that discrepancy. Right now, the questions around Joe Biden's age, next November is not about age, it's about ideology. Republicans want it to be about age, and some in the right-wing media want it to be about age. It's not about age. It's about who is going to protect democracy, who is going to protect individual rights, who is supporting a Roe framework as opposed to a Dobbs framework, who is going to protect the vote of all people. That is the question. But Republicans don't want to put that question in front of the American people. So it's fair to ask, why aren't voters perhaps grasping the import of this? Because Republicans won't talk about it. And Republicans talking to Republicans become an echo chamber that intensifies that Trump coalition and puts him at a place where Michael Moore said he might return to the White House.
Yeah. And by the way, I will note there is a record number of members of Congress not running again. They're getting out of Dodge and leaving the rest of us to hold the bag. Ruth Ben-Ghiat, David Jolly, thank you both very much.